as I was saying earlier, Lynn, a big welcome to Matt Talbot today. Just to very briefly explain, we are a community education and support program, and we're trying to work in some, I think, pretty unique ways with our group, and this is part of that uniqueness. We call this the In Conversation series. We use this as a platform for all of us, I suppose, really to try to look at our soft skills and, as I was saying earlier, to reach out beyond our group and create spaces where people can just find out about themselves and other people and really challenge ideas and notions and opinions and, you know, all sorts of ideas that we have in life about how things work and tick. And we're really interested in the work that you're doing and have been heavily involved in, and your whole entry into the area of community activism and politics and the role that education played. And I suppose when I use the word education, I mean that in its widest sense. So hopefully today we'll be able to find out a little bit more about that. And my main job today is really to introduce our host. As I said earlier, Ger is going to conduct proceedings on behalf of Matt Talbot today. So I will hand you over to Ger.
Hi, Lynn.
How are you doing, Ger?
Yeah, on behalf of myself and the staff and the other participators, would like to just thank you for being here with us today. Guys, if you don't know who Lynn is an Irish politician who has served as an independent senator since 2016. Before re-entering politics, she developed community drug service and community industrials over 15 years in Tallaght and the Canal community. Lynn has an inspiring journey in life. Lynn, can you tell us a small bit about your background?
Yeah, so I'm from Tallaght, from Kilnarden, which I'm still here in me Maz. Possibly the only politician in the history of the state to still live with Mammy. But I'm all right with that. So I'm from Kilnarden. I've been here since I'm a kid, since we moved out from Ballymun. My ma was a North Sider and my dad was from Usher's Key originally, and then Ballyferma for a long time, and we moved out to Tallaght then in the 80s, and we've been here ever since. I am 36 now, but I suppose my journey through life, I've probably had about 1 million lives at this stage, and sometimes I'm surprised that I'm 36 because I still feel like a child, and then I'm surprised that I'm 36 because I don't know how I've done all the things that I've done. But I suppose, so I went to school in Kilnarden. I was a little bit, I suppose people would have considered me as a little bit maybe disruptive or wild. And looking back now, that's not what I was. I was inquisitive. I asked questions. I pushed back. But people like to reframe who you are in school, and that can cause tensions. And, so I didn't settle very well, especially going into secondary school. But I was fairly academic, but didn't really care for the structure, I suppose, of school and how it was kind of set up and the hierarchy aspect of it. So that kind of caused a lot of issues for me. As a kid, I played football. I played for Lord Celtic. You muted me, Ger. Were you sick of this?
I did by accident. I am very sorry. I am very sorry.
That's one way.
Get me the blame, Carden, huh?
Blame the technician.
They too.
It was totally her fault. Sorry.
So I was kind of big into sport. Really wanted to be one of the lads, I suppose. Had no really interest in being a girl as a kid. And I just I suppose to skip ahead, what I'm most known for or publicly speaking about is the experiences I've had as a working class kid. Obviously some great ones. I think working class communities are extremely powerful and loyal to each other and have a real sense of community and togetherness. But I suppose being in communities that often didn't get the resources or services that they need, there was a high amount of poverty and trauma and death. So at the age, I experienced a lot of friends die, which had a massive impact on me at you know, being 11, 12, 13. I began using drugs, robbing cars, involved in all different kinds of criminality. And then at 15, I got pregnant with my daughter, who is now 21 this year. And she's in her 3rd year in film and English in Trinity. So it's always great to kind of skip ahead and show what, you know, when you receive support as a young, wild mum, that you can still go on and create great things, and you know, your children can still succeed in life. So I re-engaged with education after I had Jordan, and she could come with me, which was great, to a place called Oncason. I think if I hadn't had childcare where I was doing education, I don't know what I would have done with those couple of years. Jordan's dad has always been brilliant, but has been on his own recovery journey for a long time, and has kind of looped back on that, you know, a few times, and we've had some difficult times, but we've I suppose we've done our best. And so being able to bring her to college with me was just, I suppose, the catalyst for me being able to re-engage in education. I suppose to skip ahead then, I wanted to work in addiction, mainly there was 2 reasons. At the time, I just thought like I really cared, but when I look back, I think I just wanted to stay as close to the buzz and the as close to what I knew was possible, you know, to the chaos. I really wanted to, you know, I wanted to be with my type of people, and I wanted to also try and create support for people like me, you know, and that kind of led me into studying addiction studies when I was 17, 18 in an evening course, like a community addiction studies certificate. And it all kind of, you know, really kind of grew from there. I got a job in Carp, Killinarden, developing an initiative for, we had a group of young heroin users at the time. They were 12, 13, and I developed a program for them. Then I went on to develop the Tala Cocaine Project, which was the first response to nasal cocaine use in the country. Then I had my second daughter, and then I went to work in Bluebell. There was no drug services in Bluebell at the time. I mean, I don't know how familiar you all are with Bluebell, but like the fact, like it doesn't belong to Inchicore, doesn't belong to Ballyferma, and it's like, it's just, you know, it only came into existence when the Lewis decided to say, you know, next stop Bluebell, and it's like, oh, there's a estate, like, you know, no
was the only thing going for it.
yeah, no doctor, you know, no dentist, no drug services, and it was just kind of like, you know, the lost cousin or something. So I went in there and I developed addiction services from the age of about 21 until I was 26. So you can see I had great opportunities very young. Like, I mean, not a lot of people will get employed in services at that young age. So I did have people kind of act as mentors that gave me that chance, and seeing my potential. Was still a little bit wild. Like, I mean, like, you know, looking at Carp employing me when I was only 18 to develop a drug services for Bluebell, it was for heroin users in Kilnarden, in Cushlan, and it was quite forward thinking, I suppose, of Liam O'Brien there, because he seen me as a gateway. He was like, you know, she's literally only 4 years older than them. They trust her. How else are they going to use the service if it's not through somebody like Lynn that they, you know, get on with, and there's not this big wide gap between who she is and who they are, and that acted as a kind of way in. And I suppose I was able to then show how capable I was of doing something like that at a young age. And I think sometimes we don't give people enough opportunities to show their skill set, and I think that's what we need more of. Skip ahead then, I decided to go to Trinity College during the austerity years, because I realized that when being faced, I suppose, with you know, cuts to services and cuts to education, and we were doing great work in Bluebell at that time with various different groups of people that were, some were, you know, in abstinence, some were, you know, in very early you know, everyone was at different points. We different initiatives for different people, and that was just kind of being eroded away, you know, from 2008 onwards. And I realized at that point that I had a great skill set, but I didn't necessarily have a skill set to advocate at a higher level for those services. And in the absence of that skill set, I reverted back to being an angry teenager that doesn't feel like they're being heard or communicating very well. So I was just losing me shit all over the place, you know, and I was like, this is not very helpful. And I decided there was something else I needed to do to be able to develop a little bit further. So I've engaged in education at like literally all times within my life since I went to Ankasana 15, 16. And I even now I returned to DCU 2 years ago to do a master's in creative writing. So I kind of really, you know, I really like engaging in courses, and I'm lucky enough to be able to have a job where I know I'm guaranteed a wage and I can still go away and think about learning. So I went to Trinity, studied philosophy, politics, economics, and sociology, and it was a 4-subject degree. I majored in philosophy and I wrote my dissertation on the moral significance of class. So like the fact that people growing up in poverty is actually a moral issue for decision makers in keeping people in that situation. So then the election for the Seanad came up while I was president of the Students' Union in Trinity. And then I didn't think I was going to be elected. I didn't know what a senator really did, you know. So I ran because I wanted to continue to have conversations around poverty and access to education. And I wanted to be able to control the debates that were happening in the election. And if I was at least on the panel of candidates, I could bring it back to issues that I cared about and force the other candidates to have to think and talk about them. But then I was elected, which was a little bit of a shock. But again, my skills developed very quickly within the job, and everything that I'd ever done as a community worker or even as a young woman growing up in Tallaght, you have to be resourceful, you have to think on your feet, you have to use your logic. Like, I mean, I always refer some of my skills back to even, I know, you know, some people are like, what is she saying? I always refer them back to like even selling drugs at a young age. Like, and yeah, like, I mean, the skills that you develop in your everyday life because of your situations are transferable into the normal kind of legal world of life and society. So becoming a senator, even though I didn't necessarily understand exactly what was going to be required of me, all the skills that I had learned within the community, within the addiction sector, as a young woman from Tallaght, just came straight into play, and I was able to kind of just then excel in that space. So there's like a real quick snapshot of like 30 odd years.
I think you've answered most of the questions in one.
I see it, thanks.
What challenges for you?
Say that again, you kind of...
what was the hardest challenges?
I think the hardest, there's been different challenges at different times, and the challenges still arise and still come up. And I think some of the hardest challenges was for me to not be a drug user was one, because I really wanted to be a drug user. Like, I did not want to not use drugs. That was really hard. I was lucky enough that I had just managed to step away before all my friends had kind of become dependent on heroin and stuff, but I had already started kind of dabbling with like methadone and tablets and moving away from kind of recreational, you know, stimulant drugs. And then all of a sudden I was pregnant. So right throughout like my late teens, my mid-20s, I still constantly thought about, you know, drug use, and it was a constant decision every day. And that was a challenge. And I think even now at 36, it's a challenge. So that has been a challenge, but also not realizing that my mental health was in particular, like my trauma responses to things, like after experiencing stuff like, you know, witnessing friends dying, witnessing overdoses. I think we get so used to it in some of our communities that we don't even realize that it's not normal, that other people aren't experiencing this kind of having to react to these kind of situations. Yeah. And that not realizing that that had an impact on me and the levels of anxiety that I felt. I didn't even know I had levels of anxiety because I didn't know what it was like to operate in any other way than the way I operated. So what I realized is that being a young kid that experienced all that stuff, a big challenge was then when I became a woman was to acknowledge that those experiences that I had did filter out into how I engaged with the world, and they definitely filtered into how I parented. And I think acknowledging that my kind of brash loudness, how I spoke, there was even like a violent tone to how I spoke without even being physically violent, but it was all just how, but then it seeped into my parenting. And a big challenge was accepting that even though I tried my best, I fought my hardest, I got myself into college, there was still all these unmet needs in me that were impacting other people around me. And that's a hard thing. That's a hard thing to take on board. So having to get support to kind of at some stage forgive myself for that. And it wasn't until I was able to forgive myself for the impact I had on others, you know, was I really able to like really move on. And I think that was a challenge. So I think my challenges were more personal challenges on how I viewed myself, more so than the challenges of trying to like get in through the education or into college or into politics. I think the challenges were definitely a challenge of healing and acceptance and love or something of who I am, and that, like, you know, your value and your worth, and you know, you deserve to have a life worth living. And really acknowledging that you deserve to have a life worth living is harder than we think, you know.
What was it like when you start going to uni first?
It's funny, like I done an access program, which was very beneficial for me because it meant that my first introduction to Trinity was around people that had similar experiences to me. So I was able to kind of have that community of people first before I kind of went into the 4-year degree. So that was helpful. But I noticed when I was on campus that, you know, like some people kind of, you know, disappear into the background when they're nervous or when something new is happening, and we all find our different ways to be in new situations. I get extra, you know, I draw more attention to myself.
Yeah.
You know, so like I took my Tala accent and I multiplied it by 1,000,000, and I didn't need to because my accent already stood out as it was, but I got extra like, because it was like, I'm gonna be who I am and put all of me forward, so that, you know, faking that I'm completely okay with who I am, so don't even judge me, you know. And nobody was judging me anyway, so they were all internal thoughts, but I just got extra talent. And then when I settled down into that, then I actually just kind of really enjoyed the experience, even though it was difficult and often lonely. Sometimes for me, an education journey is a lonely journey because we're not like everyone else in university that's going home to their parents who are from a professional background or have studied the same degree that their child is now studying, and they can have those conversations in passing at dinner, you know, well, what did you study today, and able to have that conversation. So I would come home to within my own community and family where I couldn't discuss in any real detail, even though my friends and my family were just like, yeah, and support me, mind me kids, give me bus fare if I needed it, you know, the real practical support that someone needs, but lonely in the sense that you've no one to discuss what you're learning with, you know, because you don't want to, and at some level you're afraid that your own community is going to reject you, because you're like, are they just fucking talking shit at me now? Like, what are they bleeding talking about? Philosophy, do you know what I mean? You don't feel you fully belong in there either, so you feel like there's a bit of a limbo in there. But then, you know, you have to keep pushing through that kind of, you know, that self-talk that maybe you don't belong there, or maybe you shouldn't get an education because you don't really want to be different than your friends. You know, you want to be where you belong. And I think sometimes we hinder ourselves progressing because we're worried that we will, you know, reduce our circle, or, you know, not have the friends that we want. And I think the same can be said for drug recovery as well. Like, to become drug free, you know, you strip away a community that you belong to and who you love and your loyalty to. And I think the same can happen when you begin an education journey as well.
And can I ask you just to go back a bit there? You were talking about, you know, whenever you first went back into education, and the way that you were that internal voice. What do you think allowed you to make what sounds like an awful lot of changes within yourself that that opened you up to the whole educational experience?
I think there's a few things. Like, I think I've been on an individual journey still. Like, I still engage in therapeutic spaces, and I still engage in new things come up for me all the time. So I don't think any one big thing happened personally at that time, but I think I've had a stubbornness that always existed. I had, I didn't like people telling me I couldn't do something. So sometimes I got myself through, not because I completely understood the power of education, but I wasn't going to let somebody else be right, and, I also did have, even with the negative, I didn't like the negative dialogue never won over, like the negative talk never won over. And I just felt that going to college can't be, and I can't let it be, scarier than the shit I've had to experience. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of like trying to put it in perspective that for me to be alive, for me to be waking up in the morning was already a triumph. I'd already overcome so much to be in that position. So I wasn't going to let any further obstacles externally outside of my world in Killinarden to get in my way of achieving. And I did have a strong ambition to change the world around me. I didn't want to be the only one getting the education. The very people that I got involved in drugs work for at the age of 17, my friends who were still on heroin 20 years later when I was receiving my education, my goal hadn't changed. My goal was still to try and create greater opportunities for the most amount of people. So I had to keep returning to my original why. And at every stage, my original why was still the same. So whether I was working in the addiction sector, whether I was in college, whether I was creating policy, and wherever I was, the original why was still the same. Me, my community, people who experience deprivation or poverty or are marginalized in any way shouldn't experience the things that they're experiencing. And then they shouldn't be congratulating for being resilient, and using this phrase resilient, because they shouldn't experience it in the first place. And that's not resilience. That's people having to endure situations that they shouldn't have to endure. And when I realized that the rest of the country or in other communities, they didn't experience those things, the sense of unfairness in that really drove for me to understand why that was the case. And so right through, even though I'm forever changing, forever evolving, forever learning, the why has never changed at each of those points. I've just had to change direction and where I bring the why. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for that. That's really helpful.
And like if I'm waffling or not being
No.
clear, and like I'm completely okay with going, what are you saying? Right?
Did you always want to be a politician?
No, never. I'm on the other side of the gates. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've been marching outside that building for so long. I bring me kids in on budget day. I have pictures of me kids as little kids drawing their art and with fucking, politicians' faces on Freddy Krueger's body. Like, I mean, that's where my head was always. It was push, 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 push. And the opportunity came about and I was like, can I be on the inside and bring the conversation inside, but still hold on to community activist at heart and try and keep those together? And I'd like to think I do, and that I try, and I make it's probably why I won't move out of my mask, because I don't want my friends to go, where the fuck are you going? Like, I want to remain where I am so that I'm continue to be informed by the people that I care about. So I didn't always want to be a politician. I even still struggle with calling myself a politician, but I am a politician. And so I didn't always want to be one, but I do think if we want to create real change structurally across the country, we need people that are from diverse backgrounds. Like, we need people telling their story. We need people creating legislation that are affected by the legislation. You know, like, we need people creating legislation to decriminalize drugs possession. We need people to understand what it's like to be a young man in prison. We need to understand why most of the prisoners in Mountjoy don't even have a leaving cert. We need to understand why all those things exist. And if we only have politicians that are speaking in the abstract about that, not actually from experience, well, then nothing will change. And I had to kind of keep reminding myself of that. But to be a politician in that space, I have to remind myself that I can't be the only one. That doesn't tick the box. You know, I have to keep fighting to create opportunities for, you know, we like to have people from the traveller background, have people from a migrant background, like whatever our society looks like, our parliament should look like. And that's not the case right now, you know. And so even though I didn't always want to be a politician, I do think we should be politicians.
Is there much in being a senator?
Some would say no, but there is. I think it depends on the senator and how much they actually care and how much they want to do. So to give a breakdown of what the Senate does, for anyone that is unaware, so you have the two houses, you have the Dáil and you have the Seanad, and they're check and balance on each other. So whatever legislation that goes through the Dáil, it has to go through 5 stages in the Dáil, and then it has to go through the Seanad 5 stages. And we have to be able to read that legislation, amend that legislation, try and make change to that legislation. And then if we win those amendments, it goes back to the Dáil to be passed again and then signed into law by the president. So different senators work different ways. Some of them are really active. Some of them just arrive. To give examples of some of the things, say, that I've done to legislation, random stuff that I never thought I could see myself working on. Stuff like, you know, cutting hedgerows in rural Ireland and what it does to, you know, birds' nests. Like, I mean, if I looked back and told myself I'd be in talking about hedgerows. Like, I mean, sometimes I stand in the chamber and I'd be holding in the laughter because I just think it's funny, you know, that I'd be talking like I'm good at my job. So it's not that I'm laughing at what I'm contributing. Just sometimes feels a bit like, how the hell did you end up here talking about this? Like, but some of the changes that I've made, say even on the greyhound, there was a greyhound bill. So if that's not a bill that I wrote, but it's a bill that has to pass each stage in the Seanad. So when it came to me, I wanted to put animal rights perspectives into the greyhound bill. So I amended the bill to try and stop the deportation of retired greyhounds to countries that just basically butchered them and born, you know what I mean? So I wanted to create a way that there's like nearly a retirement plan for greyhounds so that they're actually retired to safe homes and loving homes, and that's what happens to them. And then I also won an amendment that would make sure that it was a legal requirement for a vet to sit on the board of the greyhound industry, so that it wasn't just the racers and the breeders, that actually there was a vet that brought in another perspective. So there's some of the types of things that I would work on that are completely outside my usual field of what people would associate me with, but I'm good at drafting legislation. And I don't know if any of you, like, you know, have spent time in the criminal justice system, but I think anyone that's being negatively affected by, we begin to understand the law very, very well in lots of different aspects. Like when I was first elected, the amount of young fellas from around here that are doing prison sentences that rang me to talk to me about the Constitution and how they feel their charge was unconstitutional and quoting the points of the Constitution, like our ability to get into the detail of where law might be unfair or unjust is actually really, really good, because we've been so policed for so long and so affected by the law and in the courts, and you know, and I think that has given me a good eye in lots of situations for being able to draft legislation. That's just kind of some of the stuff. I also do a lot of policy stuff outside of that. I do a lot of work in prisons. I run philosophy groups across several different communities. Well, in the canals, I founded the philosophy in the community group there. I try and help individuals when I can, but I do try and mostly work on national issues, on drugs, on drug decriminalisation, on penal reform. I do a lot on autism as well. So I think it just depends on how active of a senator that you are and how much work that you actually put into the pieces of work that you do.
And we just put it out to the rest of the people there if you wanted to ask any questions.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, no.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sure.
I was just wondering whether you felt at some time when you were in the Senate that you were biased in any way towards the people that were there because they were the majority and you were the minority.
All the time. I think we all have biases, both obvious ones and then ones that we're blind to. So yeah, I would say bias features in a lot of work that I do, but you know, I think my experience has so molded my politics that it can't be anything but bias sometimes. But in terms of how I managed to build relationships with individuals outside of the political space, I've worked quite well with departments that are not of the same political view of me as me.
Yeah, but on the other side of it, would you be led towards the majority, your influence? Would your personal opinion be led towards what the majority is saying?
Within the chambers or
within the chambers and within the social structure?
Yeah, I think on some situations we do learn from the majority, but within the chamber, it's not led by the majority the most of the time. So I mostly try and amend legislation from the majority to reflect the stuff that I work on, rather than just outright not agreeing with the full so I usually don't agree with the legislation, but instead of just going, I don't want that to do with this legislation, I'm not voting for it, I'm not engaging it, I usually try and look at the parts of legislation that I can actually just improve, even though the majority is not what I'm agreeing with. So to give an example, you know, when I worked in the addiction sector, I worked from a harm reduction mindset, and I've tried to take the harm reduction mindset into politics and going, okay, this bill as an overall from the majority is not something that I agree with, but can I in any shape or form reduce the harm within that legislation that I think will affect people? So, you know, bias does affect me, or people's opinions can affect me, but I don't, what I've tried to do to stop that happening in the societal sense, Stuart, is I don't run local clinics and stuff. So a lot of senators will run local clinics where they make themselves really available to the local community in a very, you know, accessible way. And I sometimes think that can mold then us being biased to local community, or, you know, whatever demographic that you're in, and that sometimes can get in the way of you trying to work at a national level. And that's the difference between a senator and a TD. A senator is supposed to be independent, and it's not supposed to have a constituency. And it's supposed to not have an electorate. So even though Trinity vote me in, the graduates, I don't actually, I'm not meant to answer to any of those groups. I'm supposed to act as an independent oversight of the legislation coming from the Dáil. So I am led by bias so many, of course, every day, but I try not buy into the kind of majority conversation.
Yeah, the last point I want to ask is, you feel like you're an outsider towards the majority as well?
Yeah, sometimes, like, I mean, my views can often be very different, but I do think that the majority have respected a lot of my contributions in terms of coming from, like, being open about the experiences that I have. So sometimes my experience trumps their abstract views of a situation, and I think they've respected my contribution to topics that they didn't necessarily agree with me on. And I think that shows in the criminal justice bill that I have on spent convictions, to try and get people's convictions records squashed so that they can move on. The majority would see me as an outside voice, but they seen me very much as a credible voice when it came to talking about issues like that. So I think it can be hit and miss depending on what the subject is. But I think sometimes, yet they might see me as an outside voice to them politically on some things, but on a personal level, I've not been overly treated like, you know, negatively because they don't view me as having the same political ideologies as them. I hope that answers it, Stuart.
That's great. I just have to thank you for being so honest. You sound so honest, you do, and very informed about what you're doing. You're really straightforward. The English is very, very, very perfect. Like, it's very easy to understand.
Thank you.
Anybody else there with questions?
I wanted to ask.
No, not questions.
One at a time.
Oh, go ahead.
Go, Keith. You go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Yeah, go
I just wanted to ask.
One of you go.
Have you examples of legislation that came in that you were disappointed with? As in, you know, it totally goes against you personally, and you had to for want of better words, suck it up.
I think there's lots of bills that come in that I disagree with, you know, especially stuff around tenancy rights, and especially like residential tenancies bill that looks at, you know, housing, especially like there's legislation that we try to bring to put like a land tax on people and a vacant land tax, so that, like, you know, property developers couldn't hoard sites of housing for long periods of time until the housing market increased, and then they built to try and, you know, so we tried to tax them so that they couldn't do that, you know. And then other legislation would come in that would give greater kind of capacity to landlords or greater capacity to property developers. And I think that stuff is really hard to swallow and understand, especially when, you know, the housing crisis is something that gets so much attention, but yet very little has changed in terms of addressing that. And I think that that's very hard. But I think what I find hardest about that is when people contact you with their situations, and the situation is so bad from a housing perspective that you're basically telling them, I can't even help, like I can't help you with this housing issue. And then you see legislation come in that's making that housing issue even worse. So you're dealing with the person that's affected, and then you're trying to make sense of the legislation that doesn't give protections or rights to people in terms of housing. So I think any bill that comes up around housing can be very, very difficult. There's lots of other technical ones that come in around, you know, different, I'm trying to think of an example.
But if you look at housing, right, just as an example, you put that out there, right? So in your opinion, like, I think I bought this place when I was 26, right, on my own. So that's unheard of. Like, my niece said to me, you know what I mean, she's 23 or whatever, she's like, I don't have a hope of getting a place. So what do you think has fundamentally gone wrong that somebody even in a reasonably good profession, say, I don't know, a nurse, a single nurse, is not in a position to house themselves? And one other point as well I just wanted to make on top of that, I came across an interesting article where a woman, she was actually living with her partner, and she said just through life or whatever, she'd never got an opportunity to buy a place. And she was saying because the rent is so high, at the moment, rents are she isn't in a position to save. So she has that awful worry then that she'll get into her 60s, be on a state pension, and won't be able to house herself because obviously a state pension wouldn't cover rent. So I suppose that the question's twofold. What has gone so wrong that people can't actually buy, and two, what about those people who don't, who currently are maybe my age, 40s, and are not in a position to be putting anything away? Plus mortgage providers, once you get to a certain age, will only give you, it's to me it seems like a disaster
Yeah,
waiting.
it is a disaster, and I think we have a very market driven ideology in terms of you know, it's a very economical kind of driven market in terms of the policies that we've had for years. So like, even though like Fianna Fáil many years ago, like even like I obviously I'm an independent, but like Fianna Fáil built houses during some of the worst financial times in the country and continue to build and build and build. But yet we have a narrative now that, you know, because of austerity and because of this, we couldn't build in the same way that we did. And we had a very, very small numbers of houses being built in certain amount of times. And that doesn't really make, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense that, you know, during other times of economic downturn, we were able to still provide adequate housing, build social build and have that affordable housing. Like my mom would have moved in here, you could have bought this house for like 10,000 or 5,000, you know, in the 80s. And then you're settled, you know, like they were able to settle here and build their lives. And I think everyone from people that require or want or need social housing to people that are okay with renting to people that want to buy, there's no opportunity for any of those groups at all, you know. And you know, to buy a home now, obviously the market, you know, the price in the market is way too high. I think I would like to see us trying within the constitution to right the housing, and there's a real pushback against that. So I think at some level there's an ideology that favors the market and favors property developers and favors you know, economically gaining from housing instead of socially gaining from housing and what a society can actually have from having its population in safe housing. I mean, we only have to look at the conversation around people having to quarantine in hotels where they're going, oh my God, we have to quarantine in hotels for 2 weeks. But you didn't get the same outrage with this, all the women currently, like the person you're talking about, not being able to afford a rent, will probably end up homeless when they're you know, in their pension, never being able to settle, or women having to raise their children in hotels like for a year, 18 months, but yet 2 weeks in hotel quarantine was being put forward like they were after getting a prison sentence of 25 years, you know. And I think that shows a real disconnect between people that do have access to homes and the people that don't. And I think, unfortunately, the policy and legislation and the fact that we do have a lot of landlords within the political class, I think that has determined policy to date. But I think to pinpoint any one particular thing would be difficult because there's so many different things at all the different layers of housing happening. And I think people have demonized social builds as well. And I think the more people you have in social housing, it takes the pressure off the rental market as well, you know. And the fact that we're not doing that or off the buying market is that we're just keeping the doors closed on everyone at every single point of the housing access, you know.
Yeah, because there was allocations in previous bills that there was a caveat that a section of them would be social housing.
Very small. Yeah,
very small.
Very small, and not getting built either. So even though the allocations are happening, if you actually look at and compare that to what's actually being built, it's never at any stage even, you know, meeting a fraction of what the need is, you know. Which is,
so you're talking about two people on big money, basically.
Yeah.
Really, you know what I mean? The days of somebody buying on their own with a reasonably good job are just gone, which I think is unfortunate because not everybody meets their life partner that they want to settle and buy a house with. So those people are marginalized now.
Yeah, and it's not a working class issue alone anymore now, because it is professionals, it is nurses, it is teachers, it is the professional class as well that are not able to access housing. So that means you have to be of a you know, particular wage and so it means. And that's why I struggle to understand why there hasn't been a massive housing uprising, because there is so many people at the different levels all affected, and that needs to happen as well, because, you know, it's like so many people are affected, and it's hard to see why it's not changing, you know.
Yeah, how's it going? My name's Shane, Lynn. Yeah, I just found it fascinating there. Mine's not a question, mine's just just speaking from my head here. Yeah, I found it fascinating there. Fair play to you and all your achievements that you're at achieving, your motivation and determination from where you came from. Like for myself now, I'm in recovery now, nearly 9 months myself. So like it is hard as well, but it's just you're from Tala there. You said yourself, I go up to Tala 3 times a week to AA meeting up there as well. That's my home group. Like I find it very helpful up there as well. And from listening to you there, like it gives me a lot of hope as well. Like you were saying there, stop using drugs and all, and having it in your head, that obsession in your head as well. Like that's not easy either. So it is a sort of daily battle as well. But just want to say I'm once again a lot of hope from you speaking there, and fair play to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Shane. That means a lot.
Shane.
Go on, you.
I just unmute myself. Lynn, I've heard in a number of different interviews that you've given that, that you use the statement, I became a story, the girl from Killanarden. Do you think, is that something that has changed for you in more recent times? Is it helpful at some, as well, that open the door for you to talk to people or to bring people into discussions? You have referenced so many different issues here, in this short space of time: class, gender, stigma, discrimination, like a whole gambit of things that are, just are nearly overwhelming to try to get your head around. But I think at some level, does that give you license to use that experience to bring more people, into that discussion and, to try to develop understanding of these things in the real world?
Yeah, like so in the beginning, when I suppose all the newspaper headlines came out when I was elected the president of the Students' Union in Trinity, people would ask me, do you not mind being labelled in the way that you're being labelled? So, teen mother, ex-drug user, early school leaver. So there was all these labels. And, I thought to myself, it's like people wanted me to reject those labels, or, because we do say labels aren't helpful. But I was like, are they not though? Because how does anyone that is a teen mother now recognize that they could relate to me in any shape or form? Or how does a drug user feel that they could maybe ask me advice? How do they know who I am, what I am, and how do I stand for? So I had to try and look at the benefit of the labels and the story. So when I continued to succeed, I felt it was important to fill the gaps in then. So it's no use for me to have those labels or be that story, and then for society to use me as a tool against my own community. She done it. Why? What you's doing? She done it. As if it was some sort of individual thing about me only that got me to where I was. So having a headline saying teen mother gets elected to national parliament, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, but can we fill in the rest of the story here on what got me there and how it got me there? I'm very lucky that I can still live in my parents. Many women couldn't. Many women didn't end up with the same support that I did. Or I'm very lucky that I had managed to stop using drugs. And I say it's lucky because I do believe it's luck. I don't believe that there was something special about me. I don't believe there was something special about me. I feel I had supports. I took the supports. I asked for help, and I had to try again and 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 try again. So it's for me, the labels were important. The story was important, but then to make sure that they didn't leave it in that snapshot was important, and that's why I decided to write my book, because it would give me an opportunity then to fill in those gaps, to point to the supports that helped me, so that people understood, that the state understood that it wasn't me excelling beyond my social class, but actually it was these interventions that happened. Having childcare in Oncason, having a house to live in, which many don't now, having a mentor, access and free counselling that was available in Tallaght at the time. All the important things that get rolled back on people when they need support and find it hard to access and get put on fucking 2-year waiting list when they're asking for help. It's like, in the times that I asked, I was lucky enough that I didn't have to go on a waiting list for counsel. It was available to me. And what kind of role did that play in me being able to, you know, move on? So for me, it was important to write my book, to go, I'll be the story, I'll take the labels, but let's be clear on the things that were necessary to get me there. So that women that are in my situation, say, that are teen mothers, aren't looking at themselves and beating themselves up going, I must just not like be intelligent enough, or I just must not be, you know, committed enough. I must be lazy because everyone wants to tell us that we're lazy and we don't want to work and we this and we that, when actually that's not true, you know. And I needed them to know there was a lot more involved in my success than me just making a decision to succeed. That's just not the case, you know.
I have loads of questions. Kind of push on a couple of things that kind of affect me directly, you know. But I always want, I was up here, I'm from Ballyfermot myself, but it's constantly from the 90s, the exact same thing going on and on and on. And saying, how come this wasn't pointed out? Like, kind of like the mind frame, people don't even know any different. Like I was living up the top end and I moved down the bottom end, but it was normal for me to be going out like rob cars and this happened. Like, it's only when I moved down here, like it's not happening down here. Like it comes to norm, yeah. Like, and it's like, and then my son is kind of falling into the back the same thing. No difference. Like Ballyfermot is his world. There's nothing out there, like, you know. And even with the autism thing you were talking about too, like my son has autism, but when my younger didn't go to school, you were at his door, and I couldn't get him into school just because he has autism. So it's kind of like stuff like that, you know.
Yeah. I think it does become our norm, and then we're judged for our norm, which is really difficult. We're judged by people who have access, and where we're born and who we're born into is luck, in the same way that theirs is luck. So if you're born into a really well-off family that live in a very quiet estate, or, you know, they've have education, you know, tracing back generations, you know, and they'll never fear being homeless, or they'll never fear of, you know, education and going to college is just a given. It's not something that they think about. So when we behave or exist in our normal, we're judged for it and told that we are causing that, we are doing that, you know, stop robbing cars, go to school, you know, don't get in trouble with the police. But yet when they exist in their normal because of the look of where they were born, there's something individual special about them, that they worked really hard. Did they, or were they just born into a better situation? You know, and it's like, we get blamed for our situation, but they don't get blamed for the success of their situation and not acknowledge that they're in a privileged position. And it's not about berating anyone for being privileged. I think, again, luck and luck, right? Two situations are luck. But what you do with your privilege then is very, very important. You know, so I have to recognize that I'm privileged that I'm a white woman. I'm privileged that I'm in a house. I'm privileged that I'm a settled person and don't get discriminated against because I'm a traveler. You know, I've all these other privileges, even though I also had disadvantages. And if we were able to acknowledge all those privileges right up to the very top and share that privilege, or make change with that privilege, we can begin to, you know, address so much of that and stop blaming people for their situations. And like you mentioned your son, like, and you know, I even look at the dialogue about my parents. You know, if there's an article about me, or, you know, people attacking me online or on Facebook, or, you know, that have, you know, like people do say things like, where were her parents, dragged up tramp, you know, stuff like this. And I'm going,
the scummy, they say, you know.
Yeah, you know, where were the parents? And I'm going, Ian, where were the parents? Like, you know, and what always interests me was I had two very committed parents, and they went to work and they taught me how to read. They didn't have an education themselves beyond 11. They done their best in their situation. They you know, they just, like all of us, are just trying to do our best in some often sometimes hard and difficult situations. But yeah, like a person, say a woman that experiences addiction, or a woman that you know, is experiencing, you know, domestic violence, all these different things, it's like when she becomes a parent, right, or when a man becomes a parent, that somehow their experience of life ceases to exist. So what I mean by that is, if my eldest daughter had of ended up in the same situation that I did, me and her dad, you know, breaking the law at a young age, you know, involved in drugs, in and out of prison, in and out of court, all those things. Well, then the people would blame me, you know, rest of society, you know, what was she doing? If that was my child, I would have this, and da 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 da, and all this blame gets put on the parent. And then anything that I've ever experienced, like my own trauma, my own drug addiction, my own criminality, my own poverty, my own lack of housing, it's like they don't matter anymore. It's like, you know, people try and separate parents from their own history so that they can judge them for how their children turn out, instead of judging society for, again, repeating the failures that it did in the last generation. As if a parent has a child and then I suddenly know how to navigate the world. I suddenly know how to navigate my child through education. I suddenly know how to navigate the autism services. You don't just, you know, become a parent and know how to do all those things, because they weren't available to you either. But yet when you become a parent, it's like it's your fault. What are you doing? You know?
Like, I didn't even know it was D.A. Francis only the last couple of years. Like, even like say protection, like a lot of people ring the police. Like, we have to literally police ourselves. Just the police not going to help here, like, but they was going to make it worse. So how can I protect me around this situation? Like, to me, like, going to school at 14 and smoking hash, I thought I was getting, I don't know if I like getting your bar. Like, I wouldn't know if that, but I'm probably getting fucking endangered tiger quick. I have them sort of contacts, which it's just going to lead me down the exact same road. Like, I literally didn't know only for a couple of years ago that I came from the D.A. Francis area. Like,
everything just goes in your head, doesn't it? It's like, wait, what?
Yeah, where's that bus going?
Larissa.
Thank you. Lynn, I just wanted to ask you quickly, what do you think that non-formal education or community education should cover in order to support as much as possible our communities?
I think like, forget the content, right? And for me, community education is more than, I suppose, creating you know, economic units. So it's more than creating people for jobs, especially if you've experienced what many of us have experienced. So for me, community education is about, can we get a foundation of healing within us so that we can learn anything we want to learn? Not what you're going to provide for us or anyone's going to provide for us, but can we get to a certain level of safety? You know, and if we don't have safety in our lives, education is going to just keep going like this, or we're going to get a bit of it and then we won't know what to do with it. And it's like, it shouldn't be about creating jobs, or, you know, obviously that's great, like obviously being financially stable and having the opportunity to go to, they're all brilliant things. So I'm not saying that they're not, but we do need you do need your basic needs met. And I think once those basic needs are met, and an understanding from community education that it's to heal is the beginning of learning of anything, you know. And for me, that's what I got out of Oncasan the most. It was beginning to address that healing that I needed at a very small level, because I was still young and I still had many more mad years ahead of me. But there was something that happened in me that gave me some sort of a springboard to kind of work from. And sometimes it's not about a job. Sometimes it's about advocating for yourself with the doctor. You know, doctors sometimes can talk and go, what the hell is he fucking saying that I need to do? And, you know, sometimes it's about being able to advocate for your children in a parent teacher meeting. You know, so many of us have had bad experiences of the education system. So when a teacher even speaks, they might as well be a Garda. Shut up, fuck off, not dealing with them. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, sometimes education for me is allowing us to be able to actually advocate for ourselves, to speak for ourselves, to ask for what we need and what we deserve. And people think that people just need to exert their rights. I think sometimes we just need to be able to recognize our rights, first of all, and that we have rights in the first place, and being able to look at the world around us and go, okay, I know that this shouldn't be happening to me, or I know I need to ask this question of this doctor now, or I know how to fill out this form, or I know how not to be mistreated by your one in the social welfare that's trying to bleed and talk a load of shite to me, like, do you know what I mean, or judge me or stigmatize me. And being able to operate in that space and to be able to engage with services and engage with society in a way that we're asserting ourselves, I think that's the first step in any community education, any learning whatsoever.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lynn.
Lynn, you know the way you were talking about the convictions?
Mm.
Dude, are they big convictions or small ones? Or?
Right, this is the question I always get. So brace ourselves for being disappointed if you have any of the following three. Murder won't come off, manslaughter won't come off, like violent crimes don't come off, and sexual crimes don't come off. Drugs possession currently doesn't come off, but that's the one that's part of my reform to get off that. Firearms won't come off. Any other minor convictions right now in Ireland, you can, if you have more than one conviction, with some of you probably know and understand this, that once you have more than one conviction, none of your convictions will ever be spent, ever, right? If you have one conviction and you only remain having one conviction, that will become spent after 7 years. So,
after 7?
Yeah. So basically in Ireland, we tell you that we'll put you into prison and it's rehabilitation. It's a rehabilitative system. And then we'll put you back into society and say, nah, no, it's not. Because if you try and volunteer here, we're going to check your records. If you try and get into social work, we're going to check your records. We're going to tell you that we need to diversify the addiction sector to have people that understand the issue. But then we're not going to let you in because you have a drugs possession on your Garda vetting form. And it's kind of like, what? It doesn't make any sense. So we don't ever, we continue to punish people even after justice has been served. We continue to punish all the way through. So what my bill does, which has passed 4 stages in the Shannon, 1 more left in the Shannon, and then it'll go to the Dáil, it removes the cap completely on the number of convictions that you have. And I try to change the mindset of people so that you think about the person and what they're doing now and what they're trying to do and how long it is since they've actually committed a crime, more so than how many crimes that they have in the first place. So it's about changing that thinking somewhat. And I want to put in a clause that if you are denied a job or an opportunity based on a conviction that is spent, well, then you can take a case under the Employers Act, under like equality law, right? So basically why I want to put that in is we live in a world now where you can just Google people's names after they've been in for an interview. So you might have no convictions under my legislation. They're all spent and they shouldn't ever be considered. But people will go away and Google you and they might find an article or they might find something on the court pages. And then if they decide to not give you a job or a volunteer or a place in college based on that, well, then they're actually, you know, breaking the law. And that's what I want to create, that people have recourse in those situations so that they're not being judged on some sort of Google article on something that they've done. So the bill does lots of different things. It does address the Drugs Act as well, on removing drugs possession from the vetting system. So that if drugs possession comes up when you're Garda vetted, that it shouldn't remain there. It should be seen like the other minor convictions as well. So that's me trying to do a bit of like pigeonhole work through this legislation and into drugs legislation. So that, you know, people are not being stopped from progressing in life because they have a drugs charge.
Would that come under now with a man serving a life sentence or a manslaughter? Would it still be the same for them?
Their convictions lie outside the remit of anything in this area so far. So unfortunately that stays out. Now there is some people that I've supported over the years that do have life sentences and for manslaughter and stuff, and we have advocated for them in certain positions within, you know, social work degrees and stuff, which I think is important. So it won't be in the legislation, but we are having like, I'd never get the legislation passed if I even tried to put it in. I wouldn't have even got this far. You know, they just won't, you know, so I have to try and pick how far can I bring this legislation without them just putting it in the bin on me. So, but we are having the conversations with employers and stuff. I do have a special interest in underage kids that are underage that have been done for manslaughter while they're under 18. And the fact that that never comes off their record, even though they haven't developed, you know, in any shape or form. Like, you know, sometimes there's been young men that were 12 or 13 and, you know, a knife attack or whatever, and that doesn't ever come off. So they never get anything away from that. They're difficult conversations to have in that space because, you know, like some people just, like some politicians just don't want to hear it, but they have been very open to the conversations on all the other minor convictions and the Drugs Act one as well.
Any other questions?
Yeah, myself.
Mika.
I was told, like, by Fingal Council that I priority on the housing list that I couldn't get a house because I'm in a private landlord.
So you were told that you weren't priority because you were with a private landlord?
Yeah.
Okay. And how long are you on the housing list?
About 6 years.
About 6 years. And are you a single person?
Yeah.
Yeah. To be honest, Mika, it's like they don't recognize that people live on their own and live forever on their own within those councils. You know, it's I think the only advice I could give you is that the only real people that can actually look at that is the local county councillors. They're the ones that have direct access to local government. And I'm not sure if you've ever tried to receive any support from any of them, but I am happy to send the list of who they are. If you want to tell me what constituency that is, I'll send you the contact.
Can I just say, hi Lynn, I'm Mark. I just found it all very fascinating, absolutely, and I think everybody's, it's a great story to hear, and there's many chapters ahead. How the hell do you chill out? How do you ever relax? Or do you?
Yeah, I know. With the absence of drugs, right?
Yeah, with time as well. I'd say time.
So I wrote, like with the gyms closed, I run. It doesn't sound relaxing to some, I know, but I run. I'm also, you know, grown up on the foot of the Dublin mountains, right? I didn't even know the fucking mountains were there. Like I can see the mountains from my bedroom window, and they might as well not have existed. I don't know. I only knew they were there in October when there was mushrooms. Other than that, no idea, you know. And now I'm actually exploring the mountains to relax. I'm also writing a lot. So I find writing very therapeutic. I would have started journaling as a kid, and that has kept diaries, and now that has expanded. And obviously I wrote the book, but I'm also after writing 2 screenplays, which have got funding from Screen Ireland, you know, just for early development funding. So I'm able to sit and write like one of those which might interest the group, especially anyone that experienced like the 80s and 90s in the way that I did. One of the scripts that I written it for college, and then we submitted it with a production company and got a small amount of funding just to develop the script. Now, not ready to continue to make, but just the development of my part of the writing. And it's based on the Concerned Parents Against Drugs movement and the vigilantes, but it's told through the point of view of 4 young teenagers, early teens. So it flips on the head the narrative that's always been used, that this was some great big community uprising, and I flip it on its head then and go, wait, hang on, we were kids, we experienced great violence at the hands of vigilantes, and vigilantes also marched on the houses of very low-hanging fruit. They weren't international drug, they were young men robbing cars, you know, marching to get joyriders out. So for me, that whole experience was never told from that perspective, and going, you know, we needed the community the most to support us, but yet in some senses, some of our community turned on us, you know, and the impact that had on families. So I find that really, I really chill out when I write, because I get lost in those stories, and I get lost in, you know, remembering some of that and finding a way to put that on a page. And I just find writing really, really, really powerful to kind of help me calm my mind. But I have, you know, I also organise football matches for the Oireachtas football team, you know, which can be good crack. We've played against them. I don't know if you know the service, but like we had a mixed team of Shamrock Rovers and, you know, the Beacon of Light.
Yeah.
We've organised matches with them, and we've organised matches, you know, within prisons and all that kind of thing. So that's always good crack. I mean, because and not like, I enjoy the fact that when we play like within a community, like there's no better opportunity to like slide tackle your local politician than an organised football match.
Is it a mixed team, Lynn?
It's not like it can be mixed. It's not open to not being mixed. It's all men. I'm the only woman. So we have had like the very last match we had before COVID was up on the Shamrock Rovers all-weather pitch with Beacon of Light and a couple of others, and that was a really, really great event because Shane Ross was obviously the Minister of Transport and Sport at the time. So I managed to convince him to plug out and get on the pitch, and that was good crack. You know, so it's mostly men, but women are welcome to play always. Yeah. So we might organise a match with you, huh? Someone there has a goalkeeper. Richard Boyd Barrett is our goalkeeper. He's an absolutely amazing goalkeeper.
We also have an experienced joyrider who might act out your play.
Was that Keith?
We have the legend that is John Farrell, who was goalkeeper on the Homeless World Cup team.
Ah, amazing! A friend
Wave
of mine,
there, John.
a friend of mine, John, was also one year the goalkeeper, Trevor Owens. Yeah, I don't know whether you would have been before or after him. I do a good bit of work with the Homeless World
Yeah,
Cup.
no, I was after Trevor, but I know Trevor quite well. Yeah, I know Trevor quite well.
Yeah, it's a great organisation. We I had 2 years ago, I brought in the returning team. I kind of get annoyed that, you know, we have these big returns for like, you know, football teams when they come back wearing the green jersey or different sports teams. And I kind of felt, well, why don't we do that for the Homeless World Cup team? So
they get nothing. You get nothing.
No, we had
I was waiting 4 years for me cap.
You serious?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really disgraceful. So I had a big dinner for the last team 2-3 years ago, I think it was, in Leinster House in the Oireachtas, and we brought in the trophies that they brought back, and we had a big
what year that was that Norway or
no further than Norway?
Scotland was the year before.
No, so that's the year before that.
Poland. It was either Poland.
I thought it was outside Europe.
Chile. Wasn't Mexico. It was either
Keep
Chile.
going, you get there eventually.
It's one of them, but we invited along then the ministers and all to come in and acknowledge their achievements and stuff, you know, just trying to garner a bit of interest. I then supported them to make the bid for the World Cup to be held here. So we were shortlisted, and then COVID hit. We were literally shortlisted, and then COVID hit to try and have it here.
If you see the difference in funding between Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, England, it's like here it's like you've pastry and you've catherines, and then you've down the country, and the lads organise that themselves, all ex-players and stuff like that. Up the north, they've sponsorship deals from banks and shit like that.
Yeah.
Pay them to go out for a week, pay them that you actually get paid to go over.
It's disgraceful. Like, I mean, sport is one of the biggest ways that working class people can succeed when they're kept out of academic life, and the fact that we don't support it more is yeah, but it's definitely something. My dad was a League of Ireland player and a referee, so it's kind of just it's instilled in me to kind of look at sport as part of my politics, you know. It's yeah, but maybe we'll all organize a match. And just before he's finished up, I've been thinking about Shane's comment, I suppose, about, like, you know, being able to recognise people that have kind of gone through. I might send a couple of book recommendations. I don't know if any of you are big readers, but they're just, I just think there's some important books to read from, you know, just from being able to relate to the author and who's writing it. You know, one of them is Brian Penny. I don't know if you have come across.
Yeah, I'm following him on Instagram. Yeah.
I mean, Brian would be happy to chat to you as well. I mean,
yeah.
Brian was on the gear for years, and he's doing his PhD now and looking at mindfulness as a practice within, you know, helping in recovery. And he's you know, he's just one of us as well. And then Richie Sadler's book, covers that recovery journey brilliant. And there's just a few different books that I think can help keep reinforcing that hope when we begin to forget it again, you know. So I might send on if I've any more come to mind. If people,
yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Lynn, thanks for today. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a very good meeting.
Very inspiring as well.
Absolutely. No, it's been really wonderful, and I think that you've left us, Lynn, with so many things really, you know, to ponder on today and follow up as a group. And I know that we'll still be talking about this in the weeks to come. And you know, we just really do want to thank you for taking the time to join us. And as Mark said, hopefully we'll be able to host you very, very soon up in Ballinascorney. It would be a real pleasure to do that, and hopefully just to keep this conversation moving forward would be really helpful. So thank you on behalf of Matt Talbot, on behalf of everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What I got over there was like, you can change your life around no matter what you are. Like, and that's the biggest thing that I got out of it. No matter where you came from, no matter what you did, your past is your past. You just move on, and you put the work in, you'll get there in the end.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Absolutely.